Washington Journal continues.
We are back now talking about young voters and Campaign 2024. Joining us are David Pakman. He's host of The David Pakman Show. And Tony Kinnett is host of the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC. Gentlemen, welcome to both of you.
Good morning. Thank you.
I'll just ask you each, starting with David, about your program, how it got started, what's it about?
Yeah, my program started actually on low-power FM radio a very, very long time ago, longer ago than I like to admit. And, over time, it became a syndicated radio and television program as podcasting and online video got going. We grew on those platforms, and now we've moved completely to online platforms, sort of as a decision about where the audience is. And so YouTube's a big platform, 2.2 million subscribers there, and we've got an audio podcast, and it's a progressive political commentary show.
And Tony, what about you?
Well, the Tony Kinnett Cast started out with my guest hosting for Abdul Shabazz in Indianapolis on a weekend kind of show situation. And they didn't hate me, so they ended up bringing me on for a weeknightly show, which is what I do now. We also push that online on Twitter, X, and YouTube because, as David said, with the online explosion of content provision, whether that's through podcasting or live streaming, it's a nice addition to the radio. It's a blast getting to provide, of course, conservative commentary and punditry to what we like to say is the average Hoosier individual, at least out of Indianapolis, but that's kind of grown as the show has grown into a broader national audience, really arguing basic cultural principles in favor of the middle class.
Well, David, let's get to the big news of the day, which is the Supreme Court decision from yesterday on presidential immunity. What was your reaction?
I was not hugely surprised. I mean, I think my expectation was that there would be some kind of decision that there are core presidential acts that are absolutely protected by immunity. You know, we could think about the effects of military decisions, for example, is often one that's cited, and that there are definitely some acts which would be extraordinarily difficult to justify immunity under. But it's this sort of middle ground where, one of Donald Trump's attorneys was on TV last night arguing that setting up a slate of fake electors in states that President Biden won is an official act and therefore protected by immunity. I mean, listen, I'm not a legal scholar, so that's quite a big claim, and it'll be up to the judiciary ultimately to adjudicate that, but it definitely seems to potentially set up a very dangerous precedent wherein Joe Biden, as an official act, could determine that Trump is a threat to the nation or whatever, up to and including an assassination. And from the legal opinions that I'm reading, that's sort of the big concern, which is once you've opened up this sort of door, where does it stop? And I think that it should be concerning both to people on the left and to so-called constitutional conservatives as well.
Tony, what do you think of that?
I think that as a former teacher, I often would bemoan when my students didn't read the assignment. And that's what I've seen from a lot of left-leaning individuals in the country who are making up things about kings and pulling things out of Chief Justice Roberts' decisions and basically creating a whole new scenario in which the president is immune from all of these things. That's not at all what the decision states. The President of the United States has official actions which are outlined in the U.S. Constitution and legal precedent. And this Supreme Court decision states that it's up to lower courts, like the one that Trump is currently involved with in this lawsuit, to determine whether his actions regarding the election were official and therefore immune, or unofficial and therefore subject to prosecution.
And what do you think of that, Tony, as far as the official acts related to the January 6th indictment?
Well, the Supreme Court was very specific and clear in this case that they weren't making any kind of decision based on these actions because it's not yet their place. The lower court hasn't ruled on that. In fact, in Justice Amy Coney Barrett's affirmation regarding the decision, she stated quite clearly that she thinks that if Donald Trump had something to do with the electors, that would indeed be subject to prosecution. Of course, you're not hearing this from many of the left-wing pundits because the fear-mongering over kings, dictators, assassinations, and other flowery language appears more useful right now to drive some kind of voter retention.
And David, the other big story was the debate from last week and President Biden's performance on that debate. Your thoughts on that?
I thought, as I outlined immediately after the debate, President Biden's performance was quite poor. I think that the real question now for the Democratic Party is what to do next. You know, the interesting thing is that in addition to President Biden's performance being quite poor, the failed former president Donald Trump's performance was also terrible. There was actually a 64-second period during which he told 6 lies, which is an extraordinary rapidity and pace. And so I think there's a real question, you know, now around, does Biden get replaced, for example? There are people who I think to drive clicks are taking very black and white positions on this. President Biden absolutely must be replaced, or President Biden absolutely must not be replaced. I think it's actually a much more difficult thing to determine. Some early polling finds that most of the folks whose names are being floated as far as a replacement actually poll a little bit worse than President Biden. So I think it's quite a difficult situation. On the other hand, I also do recognize that former President Trump lost in 2020, and since then incited a riot on January 6th, was indicted 4 times, was convicted on 34 felonies, was found to be a civilly liable sexual assaulter with which a judge determined in New York meets the definition of rape. It's hard to imagine starting with the 2020 loss and somehow winning in 2024. So I think anybody making it appear as though this is a cut and dry, here's what's going to happen, is definitely putting the cart before the horse.
Tony, your thoughts on what David just said?
I think that David's right on the money when it comes to the Democrats being between a rock and a hard place regarding President Biden and whether to get rid of him or not. For one thing, if Biden does step down, it's not clear as to whether the campaign funds donated to the Biden-Harris 2024 campaign, over $500 million total, can go with them. So that's a huge issue considering Trump's out raising as far as money is concerned altogether. The short of the matter is that Americans have known that Biden has been mentally declining for some time, while a lot of individuals on the left tried to assure Americans that, no, he's fine, that the footage has just slowed down. There were paratroopers all over the place for the president to look at. Certainly, he wasn't falling up the stairs. Those were just slippery stairs, or whatever the excuse du jour was. That now Americans have seen that the Democrat establishment is very willing to lie to them about the president's condition. And they can't replace the president. They also can't keep him because he continues to deteriorate by the day. And as someone who, again, has taken care of an individual in my family with dementia, I mean this, there's no aspect of punditry here that it does break my heart to see a man who should be retired and spending time with his family being paraded around the country for some type of political tokenism.
Well, I think there's a couple different things there. That's quite a gish gallop, and sometimes in these formats it can be sort of hard to unwind each aspect of it. But a couple things I think that are important to discuss. One is it's simply untrue that former President Trump is out fundraising President Joe Biden. Just look at the FEC documents. That's the important place to look. Between 50 and 100% more fundraising from the Biden campaign than from Trump. That's just FEC. The audience can look at it on their own.
In May alone.
I think the second important thing to talk about is when it comes to fitness, the post-debate poll from ABC on this issue found that 72% of Americans believe Biden's not fit to serve, and 54% believe Trump's not fit to serve. So I think that, again, there's a much more, if we want to do talking points and sort of, grenade launching political discussion, we can certainly do it. I'm hoping that in this format, we can talk a little more seriously, and we have to acknowledge that the difference in the percentage of people who believe Biden and Trump are unfit to serve is relatively slim. And I'm sure my counterpart has seen videos of Donald Trump getting completely wrong who is president, who he ran against, who ran in 2008, who ran in 2012, the name of the person in charge of Capitol Security on January 6th, looking around for Rudy Giuliani when Rudy's right across from him, wandering away and having to be brought back to his car. So the numbers really show it, 54-72. It is a difference, but I don't think that really tells the story of what will happen in November. It would be dishonest to suggest that.
All right.
Well,
and Tony, you wanted to respond. Go ahead.
Thank you. I do find it a little concerning that after describing that the President of the United States, who many Americans observed falling apart on national television for the umpteenth time this year, that immediately the response is, but Trump. Regardless
That's not
of
the response.
Well, you brought up Trump immediately regarding his decision. I'm talking about perhaps Vice President Kamala Harris, regardless of politics or her policy positions. The President of the United States is currently deteriorating in office. Regardless what you think about Trump or what you think about RFK Jr. or Kamala or whoever Trump chooses as his VP.
I didn't mention any of those things.
David, let him finish. Go ahead, Tony. Finish your thought.
The clear point in this situation is that I've seen Donald Trump in the last couple of months do several 2-3 hour rallies without once looking at a teleprompter, going off on several different tangents, of course. But the President of the United States in his current situation can't even get through reading a teleprompter at a rally without tripping over himself like Donkey Kong walking over banana peels. It's quite insipid to think otherwise.
Yeah.
And if you would
what
like,
rally,
hold on, David.
Can you just tell
hold
me
on,
one
David.
3-hour rally that Trump did? Where did he do a 3-hour rally?
Trump's done 3-hour rallies in Allison, Michigan. I actually attended in person just north of Detroit earlier this year.
And if you would like
That is
to
absolutely
join,
not the case.
if you'd like to join our conversation with our guests, Tony Kinnett and David Pakman, you can do so. Our lines are Democrats, 202-748-8000, Republicans, 202-748-8001, and Independents, 202-748-8002. We also have a line set aside for voters under 35. So if you are under 35, we'd love to hear from you. That number is 202-748-8003. You can also use that same line to text us. Tony, there's a Harvard did a youth poll in the spring, and one of the findings they found was for young voters was that there was broad support for a permanent ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas war. Where are you on that? What are your thoughts on how Republicans can appeal to those young voters?
Well, the core issue with a lot of foreign policy situations regarding youth voters would probably boil down to two specific facets. One being that there are not a lot of specific details regarding the conditions of a ceasefire, regarding hostage release, American hostages, etc., as well as a lot of the places that those polls were taken, university settings in which students, many on the left, have strange pro-Hamas and pro-Palestine sentiments. It's not surprising. People do tend to grow a little more conservative as they grow older, and that is especially shown by the, let's say, the increase of information that comes from actually taking a look at foreign policy situations around the world, and perhaps not something that you've seen from viral progressive video on TikTok.
David, your response on the specifically on foreign policy and the Israel-Hamas war.
Yeah, so it's one of those conventional wisdoms that's not true, that people get more conservative as they age. What it is, and this has been studied extensively, is that at any point that you survey people, older generations are more conservative, but there is no evidence that people become more conservative as they age. But I know that that's not the main thing. It's tough to keep up with the fire hose of falsehoods here. As far as the foreign policy issue, Israel, Gaza, etc., there's a very good poll, actually a couple polls, which find that foreign policy in general, or specifically Israel, Gaza, rank between 10th and 15th, or not even at all, in terms of order of importance, even for voters 18 to 29. So I recognize that it is an issue that generates very strong feelings for many people, including young voters. I struggle to find the data that suggests it's going to be a dispositive issue in this election, particularly given what the voters are saying about the importance of the economy and education and the border and so many other issues. So I recognize that there are voices that say that is their issue on which they will vote. But in the polling, it does not really seem to be polling as that important of an issue to any group, including young voters.
All right, well, let's talk to a young voter. This is Michael in Killeen, Texas, who's under 35. Good morning.
Hi, how you doing?
Good.
First of all, David, I really love your show, but I have a question for Tony. I feel like it's really disheartening to now have precedent in a country where freedom is supposed to be like our our main thing. And we have somebody who can control the DHS as a part of the executive branch who can ban you from TSA without being able to without it being able to be looked in by Congress, can ban you from can take away people's immigration status through ICE. It's like super scary, and as somebody who is trying to build a life in this country, it's super scary to me.
And Michael, how old are you?
I'm 20 years old.
And who are you planning on voting for, if we can ask?
Joe Biden.
Tony, your response?
The question, if I understand it, is that you find it. I'm struggling to find the question in that. If you're concerned that a president can order the TSA or can order a bureaucratic organization in the government to simply revoke rights that you have as a citizen, that's not true. There is no legal precedent that has stood that allows any executive official to simply write carte blanche off your rights as a citizen in the United States. If you are here as a legal immigrant or you are here as a citizen of the country, you enjoy the same rights and freedoms that are entitled to your particular status. If that's a foreign national, you can't be written off by the TSA just because. There either has to be a verifiable threat, given some of the ones that we've seen regarding the individuals from Tajikistan connected to terror organizations, but those individuals were not here as legal immigrants. So I understand the concerns regarding bureaucratic organizations. They have a lot of unwarranted power. But as far as writing things off carte blanche for individuals with set in stone rights, that's not something that occurs in this country.
John, in Grenada Hills, California, Independent Line.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. My quick comment and question is that I heard this the next day, and Trump's attorneys are already trying to have the Manhattan case, the hush money thing, dropped. So he is going to go try to get out of every single thing that he's ever done. My question is that if he becomes president and after 4 years he decides, for the benefit of the nation, I'm going to remain president, and so he tries to do exactly what he did in 2020 to negate whatever the results of an election are, can he be prosecuted?
David, do you want to take that one?
It's a question for a lawyer. I mean, at this point, it's speculation. Obviously, the caller is correctly bringing up a major fear that has now been opened up. And as I mentioned, the idea that sending a slate of fake electors to say, hey, we cast our electoral votes for Trump, even though Biden won, arguing that that is an official act is very scary. And that's not a hypothetical. It was done by one of Donald Trump's attorneys yesterday. And so I think the caller is right to be scared. But it's a question that I certainly don't have the answer to.
Tony, a part of this Harvard youth poll says that confidence in public institutions continues to decline among young people. What do you think needs to happen to turn that around?
Well, a few things. Number one, these public institutions that have taken the trust of Americans and thrown it away need to be reevaluated in the amount of power that they hold. They need to be reevaluated in the structure with the unelected bureaucrats that staff a lot of these institutions. For example,
I was going to say, give us an example of.
Right. So, for example, in my field, the Department of Education, which has governed by fiat over the last several decades, quite honestly, that has basically written all of these very weird and not scientifically backed rules as far as academia and education is concerned for states to receive education funding, that creates, quite honestly, a spaghetti bowl of laws and regulations that intertwine with each other and create a large mess. So when the system goes wrong and creates some type of backdoor regulatory flag that you have to jump hoops through, you lose a lot of trust in that institution. And so there needs to be a reevaluation of this fourth branch of the government, this administrative state, this Wilsonian idea that has been an abysmal failure in the United States.
David, your thoughts on that, your reaction?
Yeah, I don't. It won't shock you that I have a sort of different perspective than Tony generally as far as institutions go. I think that if we zoom way out, and I know that this is not the sexiest conversation, if we zoom way out at a very basic level, the larger society gets, the more we need to some degree, have institutions and institutions to which we can delegate some authority. And unfortunately, if you don't have that, what you have is a non-functional society. And so my preference would be that we actually properly fund our institutions with the right amount of oversight. I mean, I'm the last person to say, hey, take some money, go do whatever, and let's talk to you in 15 or 20 years. But when it comes to the Department of Education or FDA or whatever institution, I think the only way forward as far as anthropology and group psychology and sociology and all of these sciences take us is we need these institutions, but we need proper and correct oversight. They need to be adequately funded. And that's really the starting point for what are the most successful countries and ways of organizing ourselves. I know it's very top level, but I think starting from a point of taking away power for the sake of taking it, or defunding for the sake of defunding, or, Rick Perry just listing off departments famously and forgetting which ones that they were that he wanted to eliminate. I think it's backwards. And I think the global successes, the countries with the best business environments and the highest standards of living, show us that that's the right approach, not this, let's start closing down departments to some degree the way Project 2025 wants to do.
So the question that I would have for you is that in the same branch of concern that the executive branch of the United States is increasing its amount of authority unilaterally, that you would also increase the amount of authority with the executive branch through these bureaucratic organizations that answer to the executive branch? What authority needs to be delegated?
That's not at all what I said. No, certainly not. But my point, as I mentioned, was a broader one. Certainly nothing in what I said is give the president as an individual more power. And in fact, if we learned anything during the Trump presidency, it's that a lot of people on the left came around to what some on the right believed, which was, hey, maybe our checks and balances aren't strong enough. Maybe we don't want so much unrestricted power. But my point was a different one. I won't make it again to not bore the audience, but it has nothing to do with presidential power.
Who appoints the bureaucratic heads of those organizations?
The president appoints some of them, but as we know now, what Project 2025 wants to change is taking what are career bureaucrats that are non-political in their public-facing roles and actually make them even more of them political appointees. So it sounds like what you're advocating for, if I understand correctly, is going the opposite way of what Trump and Heritage and Project 2025 have said they want to do. If I understand correctly, I'm sure you denounce Project 2025 on that basis, right?
I'm confused as to what it is that you're suggesting Project 2025 has to do with my question regarding the administrative state appointed by the President of the United States.
I'm confused as to why you don't think that taking the institutions that we have, which you say are already too politicized, and saying let's replace the career bureaucrats with overtly political actors, how that gets us any closer to the scenario you're drawing up.
I didn't say replace bureaucrats with different bureaucrats. I said reduce the number of bureaucrats. I don't know where you're getting like that I'm throwing down the Uno wild card and just changing the color of the bureaucrats. That's not it at all. I suggested that the administrative state, the Bismarckian progressivism that failed in Germany, is failing in the United States. And that by suggesting that the sciences are necessary, that anthropologically, psychologically, sociologically, that as society grows, we need to delegate authority is very weird and strangely 20th century dystopian.
All right, guys, we're going to go back to the calls. Mike is in Old Township, New Jersey, Democrat. Hi, Mike.
Hello, good morning, C-SPAN. How are you? First of all, kudos to C-SPAN and to the two guests. This is when C-SPAN is at its best. When you have two people on here arguing two different points, bringing up good points on both sides, and just it's great job, C-SPAN. Great job. A question, I guess, towards Tony is one of them is I do agree that Democrats are overreacting with a Supreme Court decision. I think that a lot of it is going to be the whole official, quote unquote, official acts and not personal acts. I think, and the other side of it is watch out, Republicans, because Joe Biden's still in office, and it opens up a door for a lot of things there. So the Supreme Court is anything but supreme. I guess my thing is towards Tony is, first of all, you were talking about your family member that had dementia. I feel for you. I had several members with dementia. But the point is you're in education, and unless your education was in some kind of medical field, I would stay in your lane there and try to not to make a diagnosis by what you see on TV or what you hear from other people. It's not fair to him, and it's not fair to other people that had the disease. My question to you is a yes or no question. Did Donald Trump lose the 2020 election?
Yes, he lost the 2020 election. I do have a background in biological education and taught anatomy and physiology, as well as several bio-pre-med courses. And as to the dementia, I'm referencing his aides, which have leaked the president's condition in recent week to CNN, Politico, The Washington Post, and other outlets.
Tony, are you saying that they have said that he has actually been diagnosed with dementia?
I am suggesting that they have said very explicitly that he has showed dementia behavior. Dementia in and of itself can be diagnosed, and it also can be a described behavior. Given the president's availability between 10 and 4, given the president's inability to maintain specific and direct focus, given the president's inability to maintain straight lines, the pupil dilation, things like that, that are common in almost every single case of dementia that we see in public life, both in the public sphere as far as media is concerned with kind of corporate diagnosis. And of course, that's not an official medical diagnosis, but the president of the United States also has refused to take a cognitive test to look into this further.
Sloan in Lake City, Florida, Republican. Good morning.
Yes, good morning. My question is, my first statement is I don't agree with what the Supreme Court did yesterday. I feel that this country was founded on, not on a monarch, not on a king. I mean, did we not read the dissent of Sotomayor that this president now can, do all kinds of things and be, immune from it. Now, my question is, in the same situation, when what happened with Nixon back in with Watergate, would he now be totally, free? Wouldn't have gotten away with all of that?
Who wants to take that? The Nixon Watergate.
I mean, if he had Trump's lawyers, they would be saying absolutely, in the same way that Trump's fake slate of electors, according to Trump's lawyer, Will Scharf, was an official act and therefore he's completely immune. I'm sure that Nixon, with Trump's lawyers, would be making a very similar argument. Yeah.
Robert in Silver Spring, Maryland. You're under 35, Robert?
34, so just barely.
All right. You got in under the line.
All right. So I just want to say, as an elder young voter, my first election was the 08 Obama-McCain, but I'm going to support Trump for two reasons. The first one is I think that the Democrat Party is way too far left on the issue of abortion, with going, to the moment of birth and refusing care to babies that survive abortions. And the real reason that I'm, supporting Trump is that in these big Democrat-controlled cities, the people are using hard drugs everywhere, all kinds of violent crime that these, the district attorneys and city councils are more worried about appeasing their progressive electorate base instead of keeping people safe. And, I think we need someone that will support police and law and order in office. And I wanted to ask the conservative guest, has he heard, as I am an ethnic minority, has he heard of younger minorities swinging for Trump, or voters in general that are worried about, issues of unchecked crime in the big cities? Thank you.
So when I went up to Allison, Michigan, just north of Detroit, and I spoke to some young voters on the picket line outside of Ford, I did get the chance to speak to a lot of young people who were black, brown, etc., not on the white slate, whatever you want to call it, white presenting, that were telling me they were planning on voting for Trump. As one lady told me very explicitly, Trump may be an a-hole, but when he was in office, I had money in my pocket and food on the table. And I think that that's really the most definitive reason that a lot of young voters, regardless of color, regardless of creed or class, plan to vote for the Republican slate in this upcoming election, is because of, as David asserted earlier, are the two primary issues for voters being immigration and the economy.
David, your reaction to the caller's points about violent crimes in Democrat-run cities and
unfortunately, just about everything the caller said is untrue. And, you know, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't force him to drink. And it's a really good representation of the problem right now, which is we are not even operating with what we could call a set of facts. You know, his comment about abortion and Democrats being too far left. The reality is that in many, many, many states, abortion policy is well to the right of where the average American is. Americans are more in favor today than at any time since Roe v. Wade was first put in place that abortion should be legal in most cases. These ideas about post-birth abortions doesn't exist, doesn't happen, complete and total conspiracy theory, widely debunked. They can't cite any evidence of it. With regard to the economy, and this goes not only to what the caller said, but also what Tony said. Whatever this one person that Tony spoke to who said she had money under Trump, we know that under Joe Biden is when we have seen wage growth exceed inflation for the first time in a very long time. The first time we've seen unemployment sub 4% for this long. When it comes to the issue of law and order, the caller said we need Trump to get us back to law and order. Trump's the convicted felon. Trump is the guy who says that the criminals convicted on January 6th are hostages who he will pardon. There's nothing further from law and order than Donald Trump. So I know I'm not convincing anyone who believes that stuff here, but I hope that that call is really the epitome of total disinformation taking over someone's brain, I fear, in an irreparable and unrecoverable way.
Wow, that is a statement to make. The points he made, by the way, were about inner city crime. And I would be more than happy to host you. We can walk through eastern Indianapolis in the evening, perhaps south side Chicago, San Francisco, blue-run cities with a just lovely crime rate.
Yeah,
would be more than happy to.
Oklahoma City's crime rate is higher than all of them. So, you know, we can walk through. And unfortunately, anecdotes tell us very little about policy. If you're planning a vacation, maybe you consider anecdotes. But if we want to talk about policy and the historic reductions in crime, then we can't just say, hey, let's go visit a block of San Francisco together. I agree that we have a homelessness problem in much of the country. We have drug use problems in much of the country. I'm with you, and I want to solve those problems. But this playing coy with let's go walk through East Indianapolis, it doesn't really tell us anything about public policy.
All right, let's talk to Shakir, who's under 35 in Newark, New Jersey. Hi, Shakir.
Hey, and I love this part of the conversation. I appreciate all our callers. And again, I just want to make sure I send our prayers to our troops home and abroad. I'm actually from a big city metropolitan area, and as a BIPOC person in respects to crime in big cities, we are worried about the militarized police states with corrupt politicians, as well as the criminalization of homelessness and substance abuse, but also car thefts. I really wanted to speak to David. I just wanted to know if there's some way you can get to the president, talk to him about, you know, the Republicans are really the reason that the exacerbated border situation is. If you remember, as soon as Joe Biden became president, they were all on Fox talking about the border's open, come on in. The border's open, come on in. If you could just play those videos, if you just get those tapes and give them to Joe and tell him these are the same people who complained about an issue but exacerbated it, because they know Fox is a little bit of everywhere. And people were seeing those videos, and they were encouraged to come because the Republicans were saying, it's open, the border's open. So I just wanted you to make that point, because I think that a lot of people forget that. That's exactly what they were doing every night, beating the same drum. And it's really despicable. Also, the fact that they were able to just send those migrants all over the states, it was very disconcerting. And so, please, thank you.
David, any response?
Yeah, I have no access to the president, so that's going to be a difficult message for me to send him. Maybe Tony could help with that if he has some access. But I think it's absolutely the case that the entire immigration story is an example of here's the stated principle from the modern Republican Party, but then there's the political reality of it. And when Republicans worked to put forward a package that would deal with the lion's share of the problems they identified or claimed to have identified at the border, Trump said kill it because he doesn't actually want it solved now. He wants it to remain a problem so he can run on it and then claim to solve it if and when he becomes president. So I don't even think there's that much to discuss on it. I'm sure Tony will agree that that was a bill that was killed for political reasons and because Trump wanted to keep it as a campaign issue. And we know that actually solving the problem is not the most important thing to them. It's having stuff to run on and keeping it as a problem.
Tony, your reaction?
I do not agree with that, mainly because I don't agree with suggesting that bills, which is the Save the Puppy Act, and inside the bill it says kill all kittens. And if you don't agree with the kill the kittens thing, then, oh, you must hate puppies. That's elementary level political aggrandizement. As far as the border situation, yes, it is. There were things in the bill that did nothing to solve the border. And I'm not going to sign on to these omnibus massive bloatware packages that don't give anything useful to the country other than, what is it you said earlier? Throwing money to the bureaucracy without holding it accountable. And that's what we've seen with Alejandro Mayorkas. The money that was to be given was to increase the amount of border officials to stop people from coming across? No. To ferry those individuals once they had crossed, not at a port of entry where people should be immigrating. And yes, I think the immigration system should be reformed. I think that we should have an easier pathway to citizenship through points of entry. But by supplementing this cartel trafficking operation, which I have seen personally, observed directly, where people are brought up to the border, left out in the middle of the desert for U.S. Border Patrol to pick up and then ferry across the country, is a very poor use of resources. And expanding that process instead of fixing that process by suggesting that Donald Trump is actually doing some kind of 4D political chess to solve it actually after he gets elected
It's
is
not 4D.
nonsensical. Well, you're right. That's a far too elementary conspiracy theory for my taste.
It's too obvious. What Trump did was too obvious to be considered 4D. But no, listen, I'm sure that Tony and I could both find things in that bill we disagree with. Probably me more things than Tony. But it was negotiated with the very Republicans that Trump said are the people to go to on this issue. It had their stamp of approval. It had what they believed needed to be done. And Trump said, no, 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 you've got to kill it. So the proof is in the pudding.
All right, let's talk to David in Dallas, Pennsylvania, Republican. Hi, David.
Hello.
Go right ahead.
Yeah, I have a question for David. You know, I've listened to liberal pundits, including David, for months, or at least all of last year, basically either downplay or totally ignore Biden being extremely mentally impaired. So assuming Biden does win, because we all just saw during the debates that Biden is having trouble just doing basic tasks, assuming Biden does win, do you think he'll actually be able to perform as president, or do you think he'll step down, assuming he wins?
I believe that he will perform similarly to the last 3+ years, where we have an economy that is, by all traditional metrics, doing extraordinarily well. Inflation Reduction Act, infrastructure packages, record student loan debt forgiveness, et cetera. I know these aren't things the caller is likely to agree with, but here's like my general view, again, in the context that 72% of Americans believe Biden's unfit for the job. 54% believe Trump's unfit for the job. If you say, listen, either of these guys is unfit, who do you want in the Oval Office? Is it Trump with his brown-nosing sycophants that are going to try to implement Project 2025? Or is it the people that have been around Biden that have stock market high after stock market high, record low unemployment, et cetera? I go, listen, if they're both unfit, the last 3.5 years of Biden have gone pretty well. So I would expect more of that.
And we have a text from Paul in Martinsburg, West Virginia, who's 31 years old and independent. He said, my statement for the guests is, frankly, neither Joe Biden nor Donald Trump is fit, either morally or mentally, for the presidency of the United States. I am still holding out hope that both of these candidates will be replaced by the time of each of the national conventions. Tony, I'll start with you. What do you say to young voters that have that feeling that they don't want either one of them?
This is why you need to get involved in primary processes. If you, as a voter, you have concerns about the candidate that is up for the general election, the primary vote is where you need to get involved. This is something that lacks in American society. It's a republic if you can keep it, as the founding fathers said quite clearly. And that means running this race like a marathon. If you're like me, a guy who thinks that I want the government to leave me alone, that's something you have to fight for. And you don't fight for that in November of the election year. You fight for that in the primary process, making sure the candidate that you want gets to the top of the ballot in November. That's the method of doing so. And I sympathize with people who don't perhaps like the choices that they have now. But this isn't the time to issue those concerns. That was back in January of last year when you really start looking at candidates who you're going to submit for your party up into the upcoming election. So I get it. This is why primaries are so important.
Hard to disagree with anything Tony's saying. Tony, I think you and I are united on this one.
I say wrap it up and send it home for Christmas.
There's a, not quite, we still have 10 minutes left. This is from Tufts University with the headline, 41 million members of Gen Z will be eligible to vote in 2024. It says new estimates show that 8 million youth are aging into the electorate in 2024, joining a diverse and politically active generation that can have a major impact on elections. David, what do you need to say to attract all those voters that are aging in and getting them engaged?
Well, it's the group that is the least likely to actually turn out and vote. And so what I would say to them is you can have an outsized impact because all the polling methodology and every prognosticator is assuming you are not going to participate, not you as an individual, but that your cohort is going to be the one that disproportionately stays home. Because it happens every election. It's always the age group with the lowest turnout. So the message is you actually can have disproportionately more impact if you and your cohort decide to show up. And as Tony said, don't just show up to the November presidential election, but you have to be involved in the periods between elections and the primaries and the off-year elections. And so there are a lot of folks in that age group whose only exposure to the political world is stuff that's algorithmically fed to them on a lot of the social media platforms, et cetera. That is not giving you really a full view of what's going on out there. So I would encourage that group to get involved, and their impact will be disproportionate because none of the pollsters think they're going to.
Jan, in Minnesota, line for Democrats. Good morning.
Good morning. I have a question regarding the decision of the Supreme Court, and my question really pertains to the more far-arching implications of this ruling. If it is not specific to the incidents of January 6th, how will it apply broadly in the future? My next question concerns the debate. I watched the debate. I was disappointed in Joe Biden's performance. However, in thinking about it seriously, I realized that a 2-minute time limit was an impediment. Joe Biden does have a disability. He has a speech impairment, not a mental impairment. He had to take time to consider the questions being asked and the responses of Donald Trump. Donald Trump did not respond to the questions asked. He veered off on immigration and crime and on, never truly answering the questions. I think Joe Biden struggled because he was trying to remember, as any good debater would, the statistics he had to repel what was being stated. In other words, this percentage of people did this. This is the number of crimes that happened. This is the number of immigrants that came. Now, I think that was the reason, really, for his lapse. He was tired, and he tried to actually have a debate with someone who was not debating, who was basically spewing information that didn't even relate to the questions.
All right, Jen, let's get a response. Tony, do you want to take that?
Yeah, absolutely. So regarding the question about the Supreme Court's decision, if something is unclear, as the decision explicitly states, it goes to the lower courts. The decision of the Supreme Court stated very clearly that official actions are presumed there was a presumptive immunity, and then if the actions are unofficial, they can be prosecuted. And the decision as to whether those actions are or aren't official go to the lower courts every time. So for the future, that's a lower court decision. But then when that appeal is made past that point to the Supreme Court, again, as it's stated very explicitly in the decision, that's when the Supreme Court will then make a decision if that even gets to them. And every lawyer on every individual's team is going to argue from this point forward that an action was either official or unofficial. That's for the lower courts to decide. And this is why constitutional literacy is very important. Regarding your second statement, your second question, President Biden made a lot of claims during that debate that had nothing to do with a speech impediment. When he was a senator from Delaware, and I've seen videos of his speeches throughout the years, I never noticed any kind of stutter or speech impediment that only really seemed to pop up in media after he was president of the United States. Didn't really notice this during his term as vice president. But I will note that the president of the United States suggested, A, that no soldiers died during his administration, incredibly disrespectful to the 13 who died in Afghanistan under his watch, as well as the weird claim that he beat Medicare. And those were at the end of his answer, not at the beginning, as your suggestion poses.
Samuel in South Pasadena, California, Republican. Good morning.
Thank you, Mimi, for taking my call. I just want to talk about the debate and everything. Now, I like both of them, but I think Biden is just a little too old to handle another 4 years. And I thought Trump was right on. He did good in those 4 years he was there, but he was under a lot of pressure from being well, they were having court cases against him, and they were trying to impeach him and everything, and they put everything they can throw at him, and he was still running the country. I just wish that they didn't bother him and let him run the country, but he was doing a great job. And I think Joe Biden, I don't even think he knows what's going on. But opening that border and letting all these people through and then happen to pay them and then beating up the police officers in New York and killing those girls that died and everything. I mean, I wish this guy would have did something. I mean, he didn't have to let all those people in this country. I mean, what the hell? And he wasn't even making the move. The far left Democrats, they're the ones that did it, and they put that information to his head and everything. I don't even think he knows what's going on. But anyways,
all right.
I just hope that
we'll get a response, Samuel. David, do you want to take that?
You know, that's a really tough one to handle for a number of reasons that'll be evident, I think, to the majority of the audience. But what I would say is, which far-left Democrats put which information to whose head, just to pick up on the last thing the caller said. Okay. And William in Jackson, Mississippi, independent line. Oh, the caller's gone. Sorry. Yeah, the caller's gone. Go ahead, William.
Thank you for taking my call. I want to ask Tony a question at the end of my rant. Okay, first of all, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, my father, and 2 aunts I've been around with dementia. Joe is in pretty good shape. I didn't see what the other people seen. I didn't see what I seen was 2 moderators, and they asking a question, and Donald Trump didn't answer none of the question. He spent his 2 minutes attacking Joe Biden. And it's optics is everything. They show him the optics. Joe was looking at them like, y'all gonna allow him to do this? And this is what I want to ask you, Tony. What? Don't try to skirmish in politics. What policies do Donald Trump have that is your favorite policies? What is your favorite policies?
Okay.
I just want to know that.
We'll get that response for you, William.
Yes, sir. I can give you 3 of them specifically. Number 1, I really liked the foreign policy situation of carrying a big stick and making sure that American interests were protected at home and abroad, specifically regarding the Abraham Accords. Number 2, economically, I was a fan of the tax infrastructure as well as making America energy independent by making sure that drilling practices continued and that pipelines had the necessary funding and security that they needed to make sure those were shored up. I also appreciated specifically regarding immigration, several of the executive orders and title emplacements, things like remain in Mexico, and several of the executive orders regarding the border that President Biden and Alejandro Mayorkas made sure were removed the very first day of Biden's term in January of 2021.
And David, I'll let you respond as far as what your favorite policies are from President Biden.
Well, I have to go back to what Tony said there. The Abraham Accords were Trump injecting Jared Kushner into the middle of negotiations that were already ongoing, which didn't fundamentally impact the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which Trump said Jared Kushner would solve by the end of his first term. With regard to energy independence, our surplus in terms of exports versus imports of oil and natural gas under Joe Biden are bigger than they ever were under Donald Trump. So
is that
on
why the
that
strategic
basis,
petroleum reserve is low?
No, that the Strategic Petroleum Reserve is a drop in the bucket compared to the total difference in exports versus imports on oil. All I want to know from Tony is if you liked Trump's energy independence, you must love Biden since he grew the surplus, right?
Well, I'm quite a big fan of the $5 billion that was given to Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg to build electric charging stations, of which he built 7 or 8. And no one has any idea where the rest of that money is.
Doesn't address the import-export, does it? Which is a super specific question. Just admit Biden extended our independence as defined by you.
He did not extend our independence. He shut down specific pipeline construction. He encouraged the EPA.
In exports versus imports
is directly affected by the policies to which I am citing.
Tony, you can still dislike the guy, but admit that on that, Biden did more of what you like. That's okay.
I'm talking about, I'm answering your question. If you're talking about gross export regarding the regulatory increase of price regarding it, that does just because you're saying the gross increased doesn't mean that that's a good thing. The graph goes up means more gooder is not a political argument. When we're talking about the policies, the cost of services, and the availability of resources, those things matter in a fuel and energy economy. So if you're going to talk about blank statistics for Biden, saying the oil went up is not a metric of measuring success. Otherwise, I'm going to start hitting you with interest rates.
To Trump. It's the metric you applied to Trump.
No, I said energy independence, and I was careful to phrase it that way. Energy independence meaning that the United States was able to provide its own resources specifically in a way that its own citizens could purchase locally sourced energy at a price that was cheaper to them than the current administration.
By that very same definition, even acknowledging that it's gobbledygook, Biden has expanded that by the same metric. I know I'm not going to get you to agree.
Expanded it by the prices being more expensive.
Okay, let's go ahead and talk to another caller, John in Green Valley, Missouri, Republican. Go ahead, John.
Okay, first of all, Mr. Pac-Man, your name is Pac-Man, and you're playing a game. You must be blind. Biden has let in over 9 million immigrants. Once again, they're giving them Social Security, Medicare, and everything, and we've got people living on the streets all around the nation. And gasoline, like the man was just saying a while ago, was $1 something cheaper a gallon. And Trump wanted to keep drilling, like you said. And Biden closed down a lot of the permits to get that gasoline and stuff. And then what the Democrats are doing, they're sending that gasoline that we get in oil to different countries. And I worked at a nursing home for years, and I worked with people who had dementia and all, and the lights on, but nobody's home for Joe Biden.
Okay, let's get an answer on the energy, David.
I don't know that I heard a question in there. Can you restate what it was?
So he talked about gas was cheaper under former President Trump, and he also talked about the border and 9 million people being let in and given Social Security and Medicare.
Yeah, undocumented immigrants don't get Social Security and Medicare. They just don't. As far as gas being cheaper under Trump, it is true that on an inflation-adjusted basis, which is the way we have to look at these things, there were periods of Trump's administration where gas was cheaper. Also, there was no demand for much of Trump's administration due to COVID, so it doesn't really tell us much at all about who to vote for in November.
Sue is next. Flat Rock, Indiana, Democrat. Good morning, Sue.
Good morning. This is just a comment. I live in the state of Indiana. I listen to WIBC on the radio. And when I'm listening, Tony, and I close my eyes, it's like watching Fox News. Everything that Fox tells you to do or say, you do it. And that goes for all the disc jockeys on WIBC. This is just for the listeners and the callers that are calling in. This is Indiana. Thank you, and Tony, you have a good day. Goodbye.
And we have this text from Esteban in Florida who says, great guess, David, sir, I am definitely not in your demographics. He says he's 65 plus and don't consider myself a progressive, but I follow you regularly and am a supporter. My hope is that both the guests' appearance here will turn their followers onto C-SPAN, especially younger viewers. What do you think of that, David?
Well, you know that much like when Trump says they came to me and they said, sir, anything that follows that is absolutely true. So I'm inspired by the caller very, very strongly.
And Tony, want to ask you, actually, I want to ask you both, any interest in running for office? What are your thoughts on that?
When Greg Pence announced his resignation, there were a few individuals that suggested maybe I would consider a run for Congress or run for the state legislature. And it was appealing for about 5.5 seconds. And the more that I thought about it, the more it grayed my hair.
All right. And David, what about you? Yes or no?
There was a time a few years ago where they came to me and they said, sir, you should really run for this open seat. And I thought about it for about 5.75 seconds, so just slightly longer than Tony. And I said, I don't want them digging through my finances. I don't want any of it. So it was determined to be a no for me.
All right. And that's David Pakman. He's host of the David Pakman Show. And Tony Kinnett, host of the Tony Kinnett Cast. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.